How's it going? This is Keanu Yamamoto with the Coachers Podcast in here with Coach Jeff Weiss, longtime assistant and defensive coordinator at Southern Oregon. He was also the head coach at Grants Pass for 4 years. Great friend and most importantly, great mentor. Had the privilege of working with him for a year at Linfield College and learned a lot from him and really enjoyed my time. Coach, thanks for hopping on, man. Please tell us a little bit about yourself, your background, your progression, and where you're at now.
Thank you so much for asking me to join the podcast and to share a little bit. Well, my name is Jeff Weiss. I'm a retired guy right now. I did over 30 plus years of coaching college and high school and youth football. I recently retired. I guess it's not recent anymore. 8 years ago as a principal and building administrator in the public school system. I did that for 15 years as well as I was teaching and coaching. And for the first time in my life, Keanu, last year, I did not take a job. My most recent jobs have been mentoring school administrators and helping first and second year administrators out because it's a huge learning curve, and also still being a liaison to our local football staff here and helping them on huddle and behind the scenes and in the box and what have you. And last year I didn't do a thing. I just simply retired and became a really good person to keep up the house, learned how to use the vacuum, learned how to keep my wife happy with a smile on her face without getting in trouble. So that's kind of where I am.
Talk to me a little bit about, your time at Southern Oregon and then your time as a head coach at Grants Pass and what that was like.
Well, I'm going to go back a little bit further than that, I'm from Los Angeles, California. Both my junior college and my university, Cal State University at Northridge, were 30,000 plus individuals. So I try to play ball, and I'm one of the few coaches you're ever going to have who didn't play college football. I tried it. I think in my junior college of the 11 on offense and 11 on defense, I think 20 of them got Division I scholarships. That was at Los Angeles Pierce College. So I immediately went into coaching when I was 19 years old. And after I figured out that, me playing inside linebacker at 5'8", 205 at the pounds at the time was not going to cut it. And so I had a great opportunity to join a couple of high school staffs in the Los Angeles area, Chatsworth High School, Crespi Carmelot High School, Taft High School. And then I got a great opportunity at the age of 24 to get my first college job at the University of San Diego. A gentleman named Brian Fogarty was a head coach and named me the running back coach and special teams guy. And the following year I was had the ability to switch over to my passion, which was the defensive side, and coach the linebackers and still stayed with the special teams. And then, I got this offer to come up to Southern Oregon University, and it was a great opportunity. I pursued my master's degree, which I did. They paid for it. I taught school there for 12 years. I ended up being a positional coach and then being the front seven coordinator, worked my way into the defensive coordinator spot, spent 12 years there, and long story short, basically, I was the DC, I was recruiting, I was teaching all these upper division health classes to the majors kids were paying hefty tuition at the time. And my wife and I were pregnant with our first child, and she said, "Hey, buddy, you wanted this child, whose name is Keegan, and you were never home. Between all the things that you're doing at Southern Oregon, figure it out, pal. It's us, the family, or your job." And it was a no-brainer for me. I'm not very bright to start with, but I figured that one out within about 10 seconds. And so I activated my teaching credential and didn't like leaving Southern Oregon. Spent 12 great years there. I had a wonderful, never was a job for me. It was just a fun place to be. And I had a lot of hats to wear, but I really enjoyed it. And so I ended up activating my teaching credential in the state of Oregon. And conversely, I did that for a few years until I became an administrator and finished my career as a school administrator.
That's awesome, Coach. I wanted to ask a question. So you mentioned you didn't play college ball. So when you first got into coaching at the college level at University of San Diego, and I'm only asking this because I kind of felt it myself because I played Division III, then I was, coaching at Boise State and Oregon State. Was there ever a sense of imposter syndrome where, hey, I didn't play at this level, these guys might not be receptive to what I have to say in my coaching? Was that something that you had early on in your career?
Yeah, that's an awesome question, because I've really had that my whole career. I did 16 years of college football, and and actually was offered a job at the University of Utah by Greg McMacken, who was a ex-head coach. And I remember my first gig, I'd run to the classrooms my first year coaching running backs. I think in the running back room, there were 3 seniors. I was 24, and I think one was 23, another one was 22, and another one was 21 or 22. And I said, oh boy, these are more like my peers instead of me being their coach and them being the player. I mean, we were pretty much equal. So I remember just sprinting after the team meeting concluded to my whiteboard. And I guess at the time it was a chalkboard. The whiteboards weren't invented yet. This is back in 1984. And writing everything down and making sure I had everything licked to make sure that I had a little bit of credibility, because my age at that time wasn't going to lend itself to credibility with these guys who were my age or a year or two younger. And so that was very, very important. But some of the stuff we'll talk about too is how you present yourself, first impressions, character. And for me, it was always preparation. And I learned right then and there, I always have to be prepared before I do anything. And so it's a great question. And yeah, and that went on because everybody I coached with all played college football, every one of them. Small college, big college, did not matter. My first head coach at Southern Oregon was a guy named Chuck Mills. Well, Chuck Mills was on Hank Stram's staff at Kansas City, who participated in the first Super Bowl. So, another guy on that staff was a guy named George Dixon, who played at Notre Dame. George Dixon coached at the Washington Redskins under Vince Lombardi. So I was always a little bit nervous of, would I be accepted for not playing college football?
At the same time, do you think that was a little bit of chip on your shoulder and probably, in a sense, made you prepare even more because of maybe you felt that way?
Yeah, you're very intuitive. Without you and I ever talking about this ever, is, sometimes, Keanu, great players don't always make great coaches. And sometimes mediocre players make the best coaches because they have to dig deep, way deep, to find, one, their passion, and two, they maybe not been able to do it on the field, but they surely can do it as a coach. Well, for me, I participated in all our drills as a coach. I stood behind our inside linebackers when we were doing inside run. I'd have them stand behind me. I'd get cut up and mixed up with no helmet. So I always thought that I had to prove myself just a little bit.
You mentioned when you were 17 years old, you wrote down on a piece of paper that, one, you wanted to coach, and two, you wanted to teach. And that kind of touches on your philosophy, but can you kind of dive into, put your coaching hat back on and, maybe some values or a set of principles, that were fundamental to your coaching philosophy?
Yeah, I'm going to combine that coaching philosophy along with my professional philosophy when I took over buildings and ran schools was, I had a couple things. One, I really stress living by the golden rule and just treat others how you'd surely like to be treated. It's hugely important. The other thing for me was, and I had very few rules, but, be on time. The old adage, and I'm sure you've heard this too, is, there's a study done about people who make their beds in the morning when they get up and people who don't make their beds in the morning when they get up, and how successful those people who made their beds for whatever reason kind of kick-started, their day and gave them some structure and a foundation to move on to the bigger parts of their day. The other thing was always be professional. And then my last thing that I used to share was just treat everybody with dignity and respect at all times, no matter how much adversity we face. Those were hugely important to me. But, the biggest thing I shared with staff is that don't ever ask somebody to do something that you're unwilling to do yourself. There's the white collar and the blue collar, and I always frame myself as a blue collar guy. Even as a head coach, I was the guy setting up the bags, picking up the red beanies, locking up the gates, just doing everything that I didn't expect anybody else to do it but myself. Now, if others followed because I did it without me asking, then that was a tone that was set. And typically that happened, and then somebody eventually took that over. I was the first guy the one thing I didn't like as a football coach was handing out gear and collecting gear. It just was not part of the fun of the profession for me. But somebody had to do it. And if I didn't do it and to show that I was going to do it, no one else would have. But yet I was able to relieve myself of those duties because other younger coaches said, Coach, you don't need to do that. You got bigger and better things to do. But, you're in the pits with them. And so I think just being part of that philosophy is do everything and leave no stone unturned. And don't expect anybody else to do anything. If you're unwilling to do it yourself, goes a long, long way.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought up the handing out of the gear. I was talking with one of the guys that I used to work out with post college, and he played at Portland State. And I think he might be a year or two younger than me, but he ended up being a head coach for a high school. And we were just talking the other day, and he said, coaching football as a head coach, right? The act of coaching football is probably the last thing that you get to do as a head coach. So aside from handing out gear, can you kind of talk about maybe some of those responsibilities prior to being a head coach where you had no idea what it entailed?
Well, I'm gonna tell you kind of a funny story, and then I'll come back to that question. So I was an assistant coach for a long, long time, and when I decided to go for a high school gig and be a head coach, the only reason I really did it is based off of my recruiting. I used to go and recruit, as you well did, all these schools, and I'd meet with these head coaches, and they, in my opinion, some of them were phenomenal, and some of them just did not represent their school, their community, and most importantly, the players and their families. And I'd say, if their head coach is not supporting them and trying to promote them to the next level, whether it be just school alone or athletics, kind of brought me into kind of going into being a head coach. And so, but I was only a head coach for 4 years. I really didn't care for the head coaching position. And the main reason, Kiana, was I was such a long time assistant coach. I really liked to be behind the scenes. I always had a motto, which was a phrase, and the phrase was, "It's amazing what can be accomplished when no one cares who gets the credit." And I found myself as a head coach always in the paper, had a picture of this ugly mug and bald head in the, and it didn't involve me at all. I wanted the players to be promoted, and I remember my second or third year as a head coach, I told my guy who I named defensive coordinator who played for me at Southern Oregon after he'd kind of learned the ropes, I said, "Hey, I'm hoping just to milk back into this program as an assistant coach and have you," or really wanted him to be the next head coach, "so I can just go coach ball again." My first job at University of San Diego, outside of being a running backs, linebacker, and special teams guy, is I did the laundry for the team. I needed to make ends meet. And I'll never forget, I put everything in the commercial washer, and all the hip pad girdles all got tangled up. It took me 3 hours to untangle them without cutting them and stuff. And I said, "What am I doing here? This is so silly." But I had a lot of different jobs that growing up as an assistant coach, and I really enjoyed them all because it helped you learn and frame who you are and what you're about. And like I said earlier, there's especially when you've coached summer camps and stuff like that, and you try and pawn some things off, but unless you do it, you don't know how hard it is or how easy it is until you do them. And so I've had a lot of silly stuff. I mean, even as a head coach, man, I was a red beanie guy. I was the guy collecting the stuff and doing those things. I was never really the get back coach on the sideline. I needed a get back coach on the sideline for me personally at times, but you do everything you possibly can do in the framework of coaching. And I think that's what made me love the game and love the sport and love being a coach.
If I were to go and ask, great answer, by the way. If I were to go and ask some of your former players, I go ask Jet Searle's dad, describe Coach Weiss to me in 3 words. What do you think he would say?
Yeah, awesome question. Old Sammy Searle, Jet's dad. Sammy would say, in regards to 3 words, that he would say funny. I think he would say perspective, meaning he kept everything in perspective. It wasn't life or death if we lost a game. And I would say trusting.
I like it. That's a good 3 right there. That's a good 3. Do you have any good stories to share? Because I know you said you were fiery when you were younger. You got any good stories you want to share for the good of the group?
In regards to
coaching, yeah.
Coaching, I'll give you a couple. Yeah, when I was a young guy, when I first got to Southern Oregon, and they were not very good. They just were not very good. And I was working for a couple people that I learned a long time ago from my father and mother to kind of keep your mouth shut, put one foot in front of the other, and do what you're told to do. And it came a point in time where, as we get older and you kind of start gearing up in your profession, is you got to make some decisions on your own and speak your mind. Not that you have to be rude about it, again, living the golden rule, but I used to kind of share some things that, is this going to get me in trouble? Or should I speak my mind? And it was always it was vacillating what to say or what to do, knowing full well I didn't sleep well at night because I wasn't able to speak my mind. And so I took my mom and dad's philosophy of, keep your mouth shut and just do what you're told to do versus speak your mind. And I'll never forget, I spoke my mind in a meeting. And if I were the recipient of what I was sharing, I would have fired myself. But the coach was big enough, strong enough, and willing to listen. What made him a decent head coach was he was able to listen to a young person's, I guess, perspective on something that even back then times had changed a little bit. So we weren't doing things from the 70s and the early 80s. Things are moving on. And so I remembered that, and I remember that as a building administrator and as a head coach as well, that, our way is not the only way. You have to be willing to listen and be a part of a team and a staff and all that stuff. But I also remember when I went back and did 14 years of college football before I took my head football job, I learned real quickly that kids play high school football for different reasons than what college kids play college football for. And, the high school kids want to be a part of a team. They want to represent their community. They want to try and get a girlfriend and get their first this or whatever it might be, cup of feel, whatever it might be. And it wasn't always about the game, so I learned my intensity from a college coaching perspective to a high school perspective. In my first year, I had to have my assistants tell me to kind of look yourself in the mirror and remind yourself where you're at and what you're doing. Because you're not going to be fired on wins and losses anymore type of deal. And so I again, listen real quickly to my staff and try to improve. You learn every single day. I'm still learning. I'm retired and I'm still learning. So there's a lot of stories, Keanu, and not to bash anybody, but I knew I was in the right place in small college football when I used to work these offense and defensive camps, which was summer stuff to make ends meet, and I was working with all the NFL players. This is what these camps were about. And there would be 5, 6, 700,000 kids at these camps, San Bernardino and St. Mary's in Moraga and all of Stanford and wherever we worked. And, you're working with Matt Millen and Lester Hayes and Ed Too Tall Jones. And I'm dating myself now with these names, but all these folks, Jerry Rice, I just watched a lot of these Division I coaches, how many of them carried themselves really, really well. And I saw many of them remove this wedding band when we went out at night. And I didn't understand that as a 23, 24, 25-year-old guy. I do now. And it just all relates. And just a quick story, your buddy and my son Keegan got married this past weekend. And one of the things I shared is half the population, when they stand up there on the most joyous day of their life, outside of maybe having kids, is say these vows that are sacred to the husband and the wife. And 50% of the American population forget those vows because 50% of our marriages end up in divorce. And so one of the things I stressed is when I took my vows meant so much to me because it was my word. And I always try to remember that what I did now 33 years ago meant a great deal, and it's going to mean till the day I die. So when you say those vows, mean them. And those types of things, you just learn things around, I'm hopping around a little bit, but you just learn things down the road, and so, I got released from my high school job, I think because of my intensity, and the term was not a good fit, which you hear often when people get released and we want to go in a different direction. I maintained my administrative job, my counseling gig. I still have dear friends. My AD is still a buddy of mine, and that was the guy who had to fire me, and I didn't agree with it, but I wanted to be the bigger person and just thank them for the opportunity instead of going the opposite ways. You never know what's going to come back and help you down the road, and so you never want to dig yourself a hole when you have some adversity, is what I learned.
Yeah, no, that's a great question, Coach. Or excuse me, that's a great answer. Well, Coach, man, who's been some of your greatest influences within the coaching world, without the coaching world?
My first influence was a super guy who went out on a limb for me when I was 19, hired me as a high school guy. It was a guy named Myron Gifford. I don't know him. I didn't know him well. He didn't know me well. But he entrusted me, taught me a little bit, and then let me fly, and that was awfully nice. You learn by your errors and learn by your mistakes. The guy who really helped me out over and over and over again was a guy named Gary Bernardi. Gary Bernardi, back in 1980, I think his first college job was with Larry Smith at the University of Arizona. That's kind of where I cut my teeth on football, and, even though already coaching some high school before that, and he's been instrumental. He spent 40 plus years. He was at SC, UCLA, Colorado, Arizona. I mean, he spent, just recently retired a couple of years ago, and now his son is the offensive line coach at Western Kentucky. His brother, my best friend, is the AD at the Louisiana Monroe, who did some coaching. He was huge. And then I got to tell you, honestly, Keanu, some of the guys who I coached who are now coaching are very much an influence to me because of just today's game and today's younger kids. 65 years old, even though cosmetically I look like I'm 38, but, and again, that's cost me a lot of money to look this good, but I'm kidding you. Some of these younger guys who are now in their 40s and 50s, I really look up to because I've learned a great deal from them on how to teach and treat kids in today's age. One of the reasons I left and retired, even though I could have kept going and the salary was nice and fun, is I thought it was an opportunity for somebody else to take over who can maybe relate a little bit better to our youth. And I think I made that right decision. But those guys I mentioned, some of the John Mussers, who was the ex-head coach now at Grants Pass, Gary Bernardi, Kevin McGarry, who was at San Diego when I was there, became a head coach at the University of San Diego, and he was an influence. Brian Fogarty, the guy who first gave me my college job. And then I have a dear friend who ended up being a head coach. We were peers forever, and then he became the head coach at Southern Oregon, named Jeff Olson, my age and stuff like that. And we worked really well together for 12 years and as roommates and positional coaches and coordinators, and then he becoming a head coach and me becoming his DC. And so those are the kind of guys who really meant a lot. They all were men of integrity, all men of character, and all men who really put family first and the sport second, and I learned that early on.
You talked a little bit about the players and the athletes being different from when you were a coach and when you were calling it as a DC. Can you kind of touch on just the differences and kind of the evolution or the progression of this generation compared to when you were coaching at Southern Oregon and calling it back then?
Yeah, really, really valid question, because I think a lot of coaches, and I'll come and answer that in a second, I think a lot of coaches today leave, older coaches like myself leave because it's not the same. They feel like kids don't respect them. They feel like kids don't work as hard as they had back in the past and things like that. And so, kids are kids. And kids are going to test adults at any level. Doesn't matter. They're going to push buttons and see what they can do to get away with. But deep down, again, if you lead by example, they're all going to follow in an appropriate way. There'll be a couple of mischievous kids who don't have a great foundation at home who will test you. But most of them are going to do what they need to do to be successful. But I do know yelling and screaming and those types of things, which we did back in the day, really doesn't apply today. It doesn't work. Just due to the fact that these kids now have gone through COVID. They've had a difficult time where you and I didn't have that difficult time, where we just, went about our merry way, went to school, enjoyed ourselves, had a great summer, prepared for the football or basketball or whatever it was, and then your season comes upon you and you're back in your social setting when school begins. Well, they didn't have that, and so they went through something that you and I can't empathize because we didn't do it as a child. And so I do know you got to love them up. I think you got to even if you discipline them, I think you still have to have high expectations for everybody, staff and students and players, because if you don't, you're not going to be successful. But the biggest thing I think is back in the day, a team was a team. It really was. And you either got on the bus or you didn't make the bus because you were booted. And now people are a little bit more individualistic. And that's okay. It's okay to be yourself, and you always want to be yourself. And eventually they will come around. But you have to set that tone a little bit differently than just, hey, I'm the boss and you're the player and this is how we're going to do it. It doesn't work like that anymore. So I learned that a while back ago as well too. That I remember when Mark Helfrich took over at University of Oregon, and he came down and spoke at that 3 Degrees of J-Dub, and he says, my tone is always going to be this tone. I'm not going to raise my voice. Our coaches are not going to scream at players, and we're not going to disrespect them because they don't have the opportunity to disrespect us back, because you just don't do it like that. They're on scholarship and we kind of own them that way. And so I'm going to make it sure that I'm going to treat everybody how I would treat my kids and my wife. That we're going to talk in the civil tone and we're going to do it with respect. And people will get on board and move forward.
That's a great answer for a complex question there. You did a good job of dissecting that. In your opinion, what makes football the greatest sport?
Yeah, boy, that's a tough question. I think anytime we can become a team member, regardless of your position on that team, staff member, people filling up the water bottles, the training staff, it's a collaboration of everybody with a common goal is what makes that, I think, the best sport. Ironically, it's a really good question because the most watched sporting event year in and year out is the Super Bowl. And it's not just nationally, it's worldwide. And, every stadium, probably in every Sunday in pro football is sold out. I just got back from Austin, Texas. University of Texas has a stadium of 100,000 folks. And they fill it week in and week out, whether they're playing a money game against, Louisiana Monroe or they're playing Texas Tech. And I think it makes it the most favorite sport due to the fact that if you go, Keanu, you didn't have the opportunity because you were coaching at the bigger level, but I had the opportunity to go to tailgates. And the pride and the passion and the pageantry and the color and the food and the beverages and the cornholes and all that other stuff that go along that bring people from different walks of different political backgrounds, different races. They have one common goal, and that's going to go root for their team. And that's what makes this game, in my opinion, the most special game of them all. That this is common bond to see your team succeed. And when they don't succeed, you all feel the misery as well. And you might get depressed for the next 5 or 6 days, but you know what? The fun part about football is you have a game the next day or that next Saturday in college football or next Sunday in pro football and next Friday in high school football. And there it comes again, that build up, just like the preparation for the week before the hay's in the barn and you play the game. It's the same thing for the fans. And so it's just a collaborative effort to see everybody have a common goal and to have fun. And that's what football brings.
All right, before we get to the Anela question of the day, I want to know about your greatest moment in coaching or moments.
Well, I'm gonna get personal. My greatest moment, and I've had some great players. I've had All-Americans. I've had guys drafted out of small college, which is a huge accomplishment. I've had the number one defenses, rush and overall in the Pacific Northwest when I'm coordinating. I still hold a couple records as a coordinator at Southern Oregon with the best rush defense. My greatest accomplishment was not as a coach. It was watching Keegan Walter Allen Weiss play in the Les Schwab Bowl, which is a high school all-star game in the state of Oregon. It was the first time I was ever able to watch him as a parent. I coached him, and then I was in the box when he was playing high school football, and I never sat as a parent and watched him, and it brought me tears. He caught this touchdown pass from Eric Dungy, who played, starting quarterback at Syracuse from Lake Ridge, and he caught this touchdown pass, an incredible catch that you're only going to see sometimes on the elite Division I games or Sundays, and I could not hold in my emotion. I had tears in my eyes. That was my greatest accomplishment, is watching this kid who's 5'7", $175, maybe have this kind of experience on the football field to where he always had to overcome his size and all that type of stuff. And that was my greatest accomplishment. It really was more as a parent, not necessarily as a coach. But I did have a little bit of it because I had the ability to coach him from 8 years old and up to where he ended up. And if anything happened after that, that was going to be gravy. But that was a neat thing. That I guess that would be the answer to that question.
No, I appreciate that. Appreciate you opening up and, being vulnerable here on the podcast. Wanted to ask you about that because, my dad was a volleyball coach growing up and, he decided to not coach high school because I was coming up through high school and he didn't want to. I don't know, there's just a different dynamic there, and I'm going to be doing it with my son and my daughter where I'm going to probably be facing that same type of question. I guess talk to me a little bit about the pros and cons since you were able to experiences that as a father and as a coach to be able to coach your child.
Yeah, it's a tough line. It's a blurred line. You can, one thing that, Keegan and I shared is he never wanted to be that coach's son. And so he and I had an agreement. I coached him in his and his flag stuff and his first padded stuff starting in 4th grade, because I wanted to build that foundation. And 2, I was nervous about injury and things like that. You need to have somebody who's coaching youth sports who have some knowledge so they do it the right way instead of getting injured. When he entered high school, he asked me, he says, hey, these are all your ex-players who are my head coach, my staff, all this stuff. I'd rather you not coach. I said, son, I hear that loud and clear. That's fine. I won't be on the field. I'm going to be up in the booth. I said, just please allow me, a half an hour maybe on Sundays or Saturdays after your game on huddle so we can do some corrections. He said, that's great. And that's what we did. I never went to a practice, never sat on the field, just carried his bag off the field, gave him a kiss on the head and did that. When your ex-head coach, Joe Smith, called me after I retired, and he says, hey, we don't know each other very well. I was a player when you were coordinating the defense at Southern Oregon and this and that. But he says, I would really like you to join my staff. And I said, well, you better talk to my son. And he says, ironically, I did. And the first thing out of Keegan's mouth was, I don't want my dad around here. I want him to come on Saturdays and support me, but I don't want him here on a daily basis because I don't want to be that kid. I got to earn my spot. And then they had an exit meeting and a second meeting, and Keek says, that's kind of selfish on my part. You do what you need to do. My only thing is to say, I don't want him on my side of the ball. And so when I was at Linfield and he was coaching, Keanu, he and I never saw each other. We practiced differently. He was an offensive player. I was a defensive coach. I was a special teams guy along with you and others. And we saw it. But finally, about the 6th, 7th week of the season, we started to go have dinners on, I think my first early night was Tuesday. You know how Coach Vaughn would keep us in there until late at night along with the players. And the offense somehow got released early. And I said, Tuesdays are, I think I'm out there by 7. Do you want to get a meal? And he says, heck yeah, I'm a college kid. I got no money. I'll take a meal. Let's go. And that was it. And we didn't talk football or anything else. We just, we separated life. And my job as a dad is first and support and answer questions and do what he needs to do. But you want to be involved, but your kid, in my opinion, will tell you, hey, you're involved, and then that's enough, or get more involved, or back off a little bit. And so my son and I had a really open line of communication. Communication's our best friend, and I listened to him loud and clear. So it was a fine line. I had a little opportunity when he was a younger kid to coach him, and then just really was proud to be a part of whatever he was doing after that.
I appreciate your insight on that, Coach. We're talking about each other's kids. So my daughter, Anela, she just turned 4 in the beginning of August, but she had a question for you.
Okay.
And her question was, what is your favorite day of all time?
Well, your daughter, like her daddy and her mommy, is very bright at 4 years old already. My greatest day of all time was the birth of our son. We had complications in that birth. We were only allowed to have one. We didn't know that at the time. I'm going to give it a shot tonight again at 65 and see if we can produce Keegan a sibling. But the birth of my son was probably, and the day I got married. I married the greatest person on the face of the earth, in my opinion. Greatest wife, the greatest mother, the greatest person, a heart of gold. Those are the 2 biggest days of my life, but really probably the birth of my child.
That's good, Coach.
Has nothing to do with coaching.
That's awesome. That's kind of what I anticipated there. But I'm loving that you're just yourself on this podcast. I was hoping you were going to bring your wit and your humor, and you definitely have. You definitely have.
I'm going to show you something. Because I'm just coming off a wedding. I don't know how you incorporate this. This picture, which is important to me. I got to shut that. Let me shut this.
Got a little bit of a glare on it.
Yeah, let me shut this for a minute. Okay. I gave this to my groomsmen. And this is a quote by Vince Lombardi. Can you see it?
I can't read it, but I got the picture. The picture is very much visible, but I can't read the quote.
So even as a young guy, the quote is, the quality of a person's life is in direct proportion to their commitment to excellence, regardless of their chosen field of endeavor. Vince Lombardi. And that stuck to me as a young person back in 1992 when I got married, that I said, my groomsmen would probably like a flask of alcohol, maybe something else. I thought this was something that they can use throughout their life, and got them each one of those and framed them up for them. And to me, that speaks volume. Doesn't matter what profession you go into. You and I just happen to go into profession of coaching, but I don't care if you're a maid, if you're filling gas station gas for cars. you do it to the best of your ability, no matter what it is. And that way you're able to look at yourself in the mirror and answer that poem of the man in the mirror of, did I do what I was supposed to do, and did I do it the right way? And if the answer is yes, you sleep really well at night. If you don't, you have a little guilt. So
Have you ever followed up with the Groomsmen and see if they kept the quick pictures and the quote?
I just saw my best friend at Keegs' wedding, and he did. He has it. He has it, and he now at the age of 66 is still working due to the fact that he found a profession, which is athletic administration, and that he loves, and he loves being around young people and universities. And I said, when are you going to be done? He says, until I not enjoy it anymore. He still enjoys it, so he's still going strong. And so that speaks volumes about who he is too. But he just, sometimes when you find a profession and it's just a fit, it's a glove and a hand fit, and you do it until you can't do it anymore, and that's where he's at. So, there's a legendary NFL coach named Tom Moore. I used to work with Tom, Coach Moore, at the offensive defensive camps. He got to be 80 years old. He was Peyton Manning's coach in India. He's still coaching because he loves to do what he does. His passion is coaching. So it is what it is.
That's great, Coach. Talking about that, you're going through your introduction, and there's a line that stuck out with me. So I got to ask you about it. I got to inquire about it. It said, retired right now. What does that mean? Does that mean that you're leaving the door open to get back into some consulting, some mentoring, some coaching? Retired right now.
You're a very good listener, and you observe. I remember you observe very, very well. You're very articulate all the time. I just got a call before Keegs' wedding to come out of retirement and go coach back in college football. The only thing, and I would have done it. I'd only coach for a few people who I 100% respect and would do that. There's a bunch of people I would not do this for. And the only thing that held me back was camp was starting, and I obviously had a commitment to go and be a father at my son's wedding. And if you can't do it 100%, you really can't do it at all. And so you never ask a player to do something like, don't miss a practice. Oh, I got to go do this, or I was going to miss a week of camp due to the travel to Austin, Texas. And so I think the door is slightly open. I still think I have a lot to give, and still have a love and a passion for the game. And really being an assistant coach for 99% of my life, is my joy was I really enjoyed practices much more than games, to be honest with you. I loved the day-to-day grind of practice, the growth and the preparation of leading into a Saturday. I always say if you're well prepared and you execute, you're probably going to win games. And if you're well prepared and you don't execute, conversely turnovers or what have you, you're probably not going to win games. And my love and passion was the preparation heading into a game. So I really miss the day-to-day operations of practice, and watching kids grow and mature and adapt the game plan to see how well it's going to play out on a Friday night or a Saturday afternoon. So you never know, Keanu. You never say no.
All right. Golf or football? You got to cut one out right now for the remainder of your years. Golf or football?
Well, ironically, and I appreciate you and I finally had our first experience, and man, was I impressed and surprised. You really downplayed your game a little bit until you started swinging. I just became the 4-time club champion of the handicapped division at Grants Pass Golf Club. I beat, again, the guy with no arms. Not that there's anything having no arms, and
I can't tell if you're serious on that second part. Or...
No, I did win my division again this year. And I tell this to many people, and maybe you can relate to this. All you guys, and Keanu, you were an All-American at Linfield. You were a great high school volleyball player, a quarterback, for God's sake, in high school football. But I've seen you throw, so I don't know about, you must have ran the ball quite a bit. But all you guys, all you superstars, and my role models and the people I admire were all my players. Since I didn't play college ball, I just admired, I don't care if they were a fifth string guy, I admired all you guys for just the grind of football. But all you have to have a replacement for that competitiveness and that athleticism that you guys did from probably 8 years old and until your college, or in your case, your professional career overseas. And somehow you have to fill that need. Otherwise, you go a little crazy. And your kids make up for some of that. Your wife or your partner make up for some of that. But that competitive nature has to be filled somehow, some way. That's what keeps the fire burning. And for most of you guys, it's golf. It really is. And it's the most humblest game of them all anyway. And so I golfed today. I golfed yesterday. I golfed in Austin. I brought my clubs for one day at golf, which is silly. Almost forgot my suit, but I remembered my clubs. Where was my priorities? But anyway, I love it dearly, and I'm honkering down to about 11 and a half handicap right now. It's as low as I've ever been. It'll go back up pretty soon, but I love it. It keeps me competitive, and my joy right now is I play a ton of golf with a lot of my former players locally, and when I go up north to the Searle boys and what have you, and we just have a grand old time. It's a fun connection.
That was a good way to tiptoe around that question and not answer whether or not you cut off golf or football. So that was some good editorialism right there, Coach.
It's like, who are you going to love more, your kids or your wife?
Yeah.
Or if you have multiple kids, which one are you going to love more? So I love
Touché.
them both. You know what I'm saying? I'm trying to draw you a parallel.
Yeah.
I love them both, and I can't see myself without golf right now, because I probably only have maybe 10 years left of competitive golf, being 65 years of age. But football is always going to be around. I can get it anytime I want it. I might not be able to coach it at the current moment, but I can surely get my fill of whether it be on huddle, watching a Saturday game, watching a local high school game, or watching pros on Sunday.
Gotcha. Awesome. Kind of segue into some team dynamics. What does the word team mean to you?
Yeah, team means trust to me. I found over the years that when players don't trust one another, or players don't trust staff, or staff don't trust players, there is no team. You have the same locker room, you go on the same field, but the dynamics of what you're trying to get accomplished don't happen without trust. And so that's what team means to me. And then the other term that comes to mind is being selfless. If you can find people who are unselfish, and that's really hard to find in our game, Keanu. There's people who need to be the star, they need to have the limelight, they need to have their name heard. I've always loved the fact, and I really dug this about Linfield, that the winningest program on the West Coast never put a player's name on the back of their jersey. As much as maybe players wanted it, they had Linfield on the front, maybe Wildcats on the back, or Cats on the back, but they never put a player's name on it. And so team means selfless and trust and in one common goal, and to look out for one another and stuff like that. And so all the other stuff you can kind of throw out the window if you don't have those two. And it's the same thing in life in general. If you don't have trust in your relationships, you probably don't have a relationship, or it goes by the wayside and you move on and move forward and finding that next relationship. So that's what team means to me, is trust and selflessness.
Speaking from a mentor and someone who's ran schools and has been in the hiring process as far as hiring teachers and administrators, as well as being a coach and hiring assistants, you talked about trust being one of the more important qualities. What other qualities are you looking for when you're hiring someone as an assistant or hiring an administrator within a school?
Yeah, really good question. Loyalty obviously comes to the forefront of my mind, and I don't care where the loyalty is. If they talk to me about their faith, they're loyal to their faith. If they talk to me about their family values, they're loyal to those family values. So loyalty is a very broad term that can interrelate to many topics. The other thing is character and passion. And it could be the simplest things. If I have dedicated myself to losing a couple pounds, if I'm not passionate about doing that, I'm not going to lose any pounds. So those are very, very important. And then, the biggest thing for me is, we don't know this all the time, but we were looked at and observed and evaluated by our younger folks. And I've made some errors. I've made some big errors where I wasn't proud of some of my actions towards some of my reactions. And I found out that, people tell you that even though they don't share some things, they're evaluating you all the time. How you conduct yourself in line at a grocery store. You're the fourth car waiting to get gas. Do you be patient and wait your turn, or do you become an idiot and voice your concerns? Somebody hits a ball into you when you're on a fairway and they teed off and thought you were far enough away, so they teed the ball up. My reaction is, hey, that's a heck of a shot. Instead of flying off the handle, and why the hell did you hit into us type of deal. Can you wait next time until we're a little bit farther since you're hitting the ball so well type of deal. So we're always evaluated on how we do things. So I think, your character, your passion, your love, your respect for people are hugely important when you're looking for good people to be around. Those are kind of honestly the same qualities I looked at when I was trying to find my mate for life.
You're getting a lot of brownie points in this podcast. You better make sure Auntie Chris takes a listen at this. Okay, when you going back to the coaching days as a head coach or as a coordinator, when your team ever faced a setback or a bad loss, I know that was about 50, 60 years ago, but what did that conversation look like to the team after the loss or the setback?
As a younger coach, I probably had the same emotions and didn't have the compassion and the spirit and the proper words to console them as the adult and them being the player, because I was started out as a young coach. And so I was more reactionary to the loss, let's say, or the adversity. As an older coach, the one thing I always did before I addressed a team was to make sure I had myself in check. As upset as I was, and no one worked, I felt harder than I worked, even though I know everybody works extremely hard. But to go in and blame it on an official call or to blame it on a player, I always had a line that you never correct the act. You don't discipline the person. You correct the act that they were doing. So if you had a kid who had an unsportsmanlike, you don't bully the kid who had the unsportsmanlike. It's a teachable moment, so you correct that act. But as an older coach, I found out that your words and statements mean a great deal, and it's something they remember. They're not always going to remember the wins and losses, but they're going to remember your words and statements. And if you're truly sincere and tell them you put a great effort forward, then come out on our end this time. We did everything we possibly could to win the game or to win the practice or to win the competition. And it's just sometimes people win and sometimes people lose. But those words and statements are hugely impactful, not only today, but down the road, 15, 20, 25 years. That's the stuff that I get back from some of the kids I coached who are now grown men in their 50s and 60s is I remember when you said this. I don't remember the outcome of that game, but I remember you said this. And so I'll give you a quick story if you got a second. We were playing up at PLU at Southern Oregon, and we always had a tough time with Frosty and his group. And Frosty Western, the old coach, who wrote a great book, Make the Big Time Where You Are book. And we had a kid at PLU. The game was tied. I think, it was 13-12. We're kicking an extra point. We just scored. We're kicking an extra point to go tie the game. Their kid blatantly was offsides, blocked the kick. There was no flag thrown, game ends, no overtime, game ends, we lose. We don't go to the playoffs. They go to the playoffs. And everybody is just terribly, physically, mentally, spiritually upset. We could have came in and said, hey, the refs blew that. We came in and I said specifically, there were opportunities for us to do better during the game that we didn't take advantage of. And conversely, we would not have been in that position to have that kid be offsides and block a kick if we just had executed a little bit better and maybe the second series of the third quarter, or we prevented a first down and where they kept the drive going and we didn't make them punt. And so again, those words and statements are just so valuable.
I think we've kind of touched on it throughout the conversation kind of indirectly, but can you kind of touch on when you were coaching things that you did that you thought were unique, or coaches that you coach with that you thought were unique that they did to, instill, reinforce, and build up that team's identity, that team's culture?
Yeah, that's a great question, because one of the things I love, Keanu, and you can relate to this, is, we as coaches think we know a lot, but when the game actually happens and it's taking place, as an example, I rarely would call a full-out six-man pressure until I talk to our corners and safeties and or Rover to say, tell me about the guy you're facing. How comfortable are you? Are you ready to play some man coverage yet? Or if you are, do you have to back off a little bit and give him a better cushion? Do you have a good feel for him? And for me, I always listen to the player. Not playing college football, and it doesn't always work and translate what you put on the board off of film and your breakdowns and preparation. Is the actual game's going on, and a player would say, hey, this guy I'm facing, I didn't realize how fast he looked fast on film, but man, in reality he's a lot faster than I thought he is, and I don't have a real good feel for him. Can you stay in zone a little bit longer for me until I get a better feel, whether I have to give a cushion, maybe get a little bit farther inside in man coverage? And I always appreciated their feedback. Instead of saying, I'm the coach, you're the player, and this is how we're going to do it. It's like the most successful coaches, the first question when a new head coach takes over is, what are you going to run offensively? What are you going to run defensively? And most of them have this answer, hey, this is my system, here's how we're going. I think the best coaches adapt their schemes towards their personnel. If you have a read option quarterback, but you're a pocket passer philosophy offensively, but yet your guy who's going to call the plays for you is a more of a read option, more of an athletic type of quarterback. I think, it's best that you adapt your scheme around that kid's athleticism versus this is my way and I'm a pocket guy and then we're going to throw the ball out of a 5-step drop and this is what we're going to do come hell or high water. And so that's my answer to that question is that I think you really have to be a really good listener and then empathize and feel of what your players' feedback is, especially at halftime adjustments and this and that. Hey, can you stay out of this? Hey, we've tried this, we practice it, it's not working. Why are we sticking with it? Can we try something else? And as a coaching or coaching staff, you need to listen to that, I think, to be successful.
That's a great answer, Coach. Aside from winning, I mean, you kind of touched on this as well when you're talking about the clinic that you guys put on. Aside from winning, okay, what other metrics do you use to define success?
One of the things is you can tell joy. I'm going to use you as an example. You were, and I've been around thousands of players, and I didn't have the opportunity and the honor and the pleasure of coaching you, but I coached with you and saw a film of you as a player. And one of the things that I really enjoyed about you and I enjoyed about a lot of my players was their enthusiasm. You always have a smile on your face. You always look at the glass as full, not even half full, and definitely not half empty, but full. You take each moment and make it your best moment. You've had some adversity with your family, not to get too personal, that you had to overcome that most people don't overcome. It's tragic, but yet, you see the joy in your kid's life. You see the joy in whatever your health or your well-being or your wife's success. And so I think just having a positive attitude, living each day to its fullest, doing the best job you possibly can are those types of things. I forgot the original question. What was the original question?
Well, I got lost up in you giving me all these compliments. I started to get in my head, started expanding a little bit. So I forgot the original question too. I honestly forgot the original question too once you started talking.
Something that I learned from you of just being upbeat. I mean, you just being upbeat. And I learned that from the first moment I met you when you came back from playing in Europe and missing a couple of or a week of fall camp and reuniting with your girlfriend, not even your fiance or wife yet, of just being happy and off the topic. But I remember, and I didn't know you beforehand, but your hair was out of control when you came back from Europe. And I remember Jackson, who I didn't know from a hole in the wall, saying, "Holy mackerel, look at but the joy in his face to see you back." So here's a coach and a player's relationship. It's same thing with some of the other coaches. That here comes Happy Keanu. He's back and he brings a lot of positive mojo to whatever we do, whether it be an all-you-can-eat buffet or whether it be something that's really important to be on the field or in the classroom.
All right, I know this is a while ago. Going back to your coordinating days, I appreciate you and appreciate the compliments there. Going back to your coaching days, talk to me about the self-scout process as a coach. And let's talk post-season, and then we'll talk in season.
Yeah, I was a big proponent of self-scouting, maybe even before self-scouting was there. And I often used to talk to the offensive side of the ball about self-scouting because, the predictability. But yeah, we looked at everything. And I'm not a guy who looks at a whiteboard and reinvents the wheel. I mean, I'm a realist. I know what we can do. I know who we have. And I think I knew what we can do best. But I also know there was other ways of tackling that. And so I looked at things, whether we did them well or whether we got beaten areas that we needed to redo. And so we self-scouted everything that we did. We had the ability, even back in the day, to rewatch practice. We filmed practice and rewatch that and then show that the next day to the kids before we went on and hit the field again. That, if you don't self-scout, I think you're jeopardizing your success. It's hugely important. I did it in the off season. In season, I went back through every ready sheet I ever prepared, even though teams are different and you attack them differently, to make sure that what I was doing from the 30-yard line, them heading out on the left hash, that I wasn't making the same calls. Or back in the day when I was coordinating, no huddle just emerged, like kind of 86, 87, 88 huddled at that time. And then there was some innovative coaches that kind of no huddle. And we had and we also huddled defensively. And so you had to break that mold of not huddling defensively and doing hand signals. And I remember we had 5 calls, a couple pressures, a couple of zones, a couple of different shifts and what have you. And I made sure those 5 calls weren't always the same. And it was hard on the players to memorize some things week in and week out. But if teams wanted to no huddle us and they said, okay, they're in that, they have their wristband, they say they're in this, and I didn't change week to week, we weren't putting our kids in the best position to do things. So we always self-scouted. And then one of the things, Keanu, I really remember back in the day is even as a young guy, I said, when kids messed up, I really took onus on saying, if they messed up, that's on the coaches. That's mental. When a kid physically got beat, a kid made a better catch, a guy beat somebody in man coverage, that's part of the game. It's the physicality. That kid's faster than me and what have you. But when a kid messed up, it was mental. And that's where the self-scout came in, that our message to them was not conveyed enough to where they understood what we wanted to get out of the situation. And so they messed up. If we had a miscommunication, we ran split coverages all the time. So one side would run 2, one side would run 4. The corner had to talk to the safety had to talk to the outside linebacker, and they had to have something to where they were communicating. Well, if I didn't convey that well enough to how they were communicating to those same groupings, that's on us. And so we had to self-scout that to say, how can we do it better, type of stuff. So self-scouting is huge. It's hugely important. Now with Huddle, I think it's really easy to do, to be honest with you. I don't know if everybody takes advantage of it, but it's really easy to do. And it's probably one of the first things you should do after watching your film is to self-scout yourself and then move on to the next stuff.
I asked Coach Brett Elliott this, and I'd love to get your opinion because he was from an offense perspective. What is a situation in football that kind of gets overlooked that a lot of teams don't practice? And his answer was, when you get out of sequence as an offense and you get into second and long scenarios, and how do you get out of that and put yourself in a manageable third down? From in your opinion, what is a situation that kind of gets overlooked?
Yeah, I really think the most fundamental type of stuff that we have a tendency to concentrate so much on formation groups, on tendencies, that and the one thing I really appreciate at Linfield is we forget the fundamentals. And we don't tackle well enough, we don't run to the ball well enough, we don't do the things that you're supposed to be doing. As an example is, and for whatever reason, it's always worked. You're bringing pressure and you have 2 guys in B gap and no one in the C gap, even though somebody was supposed to be in the C gap, and somehow magically the offense found the C gap. And all of a sudden, everybody's looking around and chasing a number down the field. So fundamentals are hugely important. As an example, we used to do a clap drill on just pressures. 1, 2, 3, clap and point to where you're going to make sure 3 people weren't pointing in the A gap and no one was pointing in the B and C gap type of stuff. And yeah, did that take practice time? Yeah, it was huge. But I really think the fundamentals, we concentrate so much on scheme. And I always had an adage, you want to be the best positional coach you can possibly be. And until you master that, you really have no business being a coordinator. Because what happens when you coordinate is you're not just doing a position, you're doing the one side of the football. And you really lose perspective of your own position. And I found oftentimes when people got elevated to coordinator positions, their position suffered unless they had an assistant to take over and they were still doing it all by themselves, because their mind was on the overall scheme and not on their position. And conversely, fundamentals and everything kind of went down the pooper. So
I asked you this beforehand, or I gave you heads up on this beforehand. Your opinion, is the knowledge of the game of football, is it finite? Is it limited?
Yeah, I think you get in trouble if you think it's finite. I think, there's some evolution to the game, but there's also some things that were around in the 60s that kind of came to the 70s, were forgotten in the 80s and 90s that are now back in 2025-ish type of deal. And so it's a little bit of evolvement. But yeah, I don't think it's infinite. You got to keep things open and broad. And there she is. Anela, how are you, pretty? And it is something that if you have blinders on and you stay within those blinders, Keanu, you're not going to be very successful, in my opinion. I think you have to open up the avenues and the doors and the pathways, and to make sure that you're encompassing everything and learning and teaching and listening to everything, and not just, it's an open book, and it's always going to be an open book. And that's why some of these innovators, some of these young coordinators now on the NFL level are coordinators and or head coaches because of their innovation, because they didn't just stay in what they were taught type of deal. So, a prime example would be, back in the day, Buddy Ryan's two kids. They could have done their dad's way, who was a Super Bowl champ with the Bears, and could have done this and that, but they evolved and they did some different things and came about it from a different direction sometimes. So I think it's important to do that.
Well, Coach, you definitely dropped a lot of wisdom on us, and a lot of adages and quotes and anecdotes. Is there anything that comes to your mind that you haven't shared on the podcast? Any acronyms or quotes or anything else that you don't mind sharing that's been important in your progression?
One of the things I would say is trust who you are and believe in your foundation. If you are somebody who didn't have a rock solid foundation, whether it be from your aunt and uncles, your grandparents, your mom and dad, you're going to find that from somebody else. And if you were one who had a really stable and great foundation, and that's where everything is built upon anyway, then you stick to that and then grow from that. I was very fortunate and had a wonderful mom and dad who are no longer with me, taught me great wisdom. I was punished probably 3/4 of my life because I tried to do things I wasn't supposed to do, and I didn't meet their expectations, and I had to serve my consequences. And I learned from that a great deal. So trust who you are and the people who you surround yourself with, and you'll probably be very, very successful and also have a great heart for people, compassion, and empathy. I mean, I think we often forget to put yourself in somebody's shoes and to understand what maybe they're going through that we don't even know about yet. And so don't be reactive, be proactive, and understand that people are people and we screw up all the time. And to have an opportunity to give people second and third chances, very important.
I appreciate that, Coach. Little game before we conclude, little game of smash or pass, okay? So the goal of this game is I give you a situation in football. Either smash, run, pass, or if the opportunity presents itself, kick, if it makes sense.
Okay.
All right? You ready?
Yep, I'm ready.
You ready? Now I got to think of my situation. I got to make
Smash!
sure. All right, here we go. 7 seconds left, 0 timeouts, 4th and goal on the 2-yard line, down 3. Smash, pass, or kick.
Jeopardy of losing my contract. Smash.
If you're not 4th and 2, right? Running it?
I'm going to run it.
I love it.
I'm an old school. I'm going to probably bring in 4 tight ends and a big old fullback, and we're going to smash the shit out of it and see what happens. Sorry, I shouldn't say that. We're going to smash it and see what happens.
That's a good answer. I like that. All right, I got my daughter just bugging me over here, but I appreciate your time, Coach, and I appreciate your insight on everything, and really enjoyed. Always good talking with you, man.
It's good. Love you to death. Let me know when it airs or how to get on the link and what have you, and then let me know if you want me to hook you up with any of my former guys, like the guy I mentioned, one of my mentors, Gary Bernardi, who spent 40 years in the Pac-12 and coached some NFL guys, obviously, and he's retired, living in Vegas right now. So he'd be
In his best life, huh?
living his best life, following his sons and his son-in-law around.
Yeah.
Who's still coaching football. But yeah, if you want some people, let me know.
Yeah.
And I can get you hooked up.